What would you do if your own family looked you in the eye and told you you weren't good enough to be seen with them? The oxygen seemed to vanish from the room as Margot Morgan's perfectly manicured finger pointed straight at me. "Rachel, dear," she said, her voice coated in saccharine civility. "I'm sure you understand a place like the Royal Pearl requires a certain refinement. Perhaps it's best you sit this one out." Her words sliced cleaner than any knife. The Morgan family dining room fell silent. 20 eyes shifted to me, some flickered with pity, others with veiled satisfaction. The pristine crystal chandelier above us cast fractured light across the dark mahogany table, catching on the freshly polished silverware, the ivory menu cards, and the blueprints Margot had just unfurled of the presidential villa she'd booked in the Maldives, a place she had no intention of sharing with me. Ethan, my husband, squeezed my hand under the table. Hard. His pulse thudded against my palm like a warning drum, but I didn't flinch. "Mother," he said, his voice tight, jaw clenched. "If Rachel's not going, then I'm not either." Margot's expression stiffened. She wore the same look I'd seen every time I stepped one toe over the line she'd drawn around her perfect world. That subtle, smug disbelief that her son had dared defy her. "Don't be melodramatic, Ethan," she said coolly. "Your cousins are flying in from Geneva. The ambassador's daughter is attending. You know how important these connections are. You can't skip it because your wife might feel out of place." And then came the dagger twist. "She's right," Sloane added, swirling the wine in her glass. "Rachel, remember how overwhelmed you looked at the yacht club last summer. The heat, the linen dress. It really wasn't your scene." She smiled without smiling. What she didn't mention was how she'd accidentally spilled champagne on that dress, then offered to buy me something more appropriate in front of everyone. I placed a gentle hand on Ethan's arm. "It's okay," I whispered. "You should go." The triumph that flashed across Margot's face made my stomach turn. She thought she'd won. Again. That's what made it so satisfying, because what she didn't know was that I'd already been preparing for this moment. For months. I wasn't just some coffee girl, as Margot once called me, with a champagne flute in hand and an eyebrow arched toward Paris. Yes, when Ethan met me, I was behind a counter in a cafe pouring cappuccinos and stocking pastry shelves while finishing my MBA coursework late at night. But what no one knew, no one except Ethan, was that I'd also been investing. Since my early 20s, I'd built a small empire in cryptocurrency seed funding and emerging tech, quietly, carefully, secretly. Because I'd seen people change when they thought you had money. I'd watched respect morph into envy, support sour into sabotage. So I lived modestly. I let the Morgans believe I was ordinary. It was easier that way. Until it wasn't. Margot was glowing as she wrapped up her fourth retelling of how she'd booked the entire Royal Pearl Island resort. Private beaches, personal chefs, helicopters, nothing but the best for the Morgan name. I smiled and nodded. Just as I had the last dozen times she'd weaponized wealth like it was a social crown. But inside, something sharper stirred. I'd heard Margot mention Royal Pearl Island in passing 6 months ago, back when she didn't think I was listening. And while she'd been busy showing off reservation confirmations and custom itinerary folders, I had been opening private negotiations with the resort's parent company. It was bleeding cash. I saw opportunity. And I didn't just buy the villa, I bought the island. That night, as Ethan and I drove home through the winding Santa Barbara hills, I tapped open my email, the one I'd been waiting on. The subject line read, "Acquisition complete. Royal Pearl Island Resort is now under your sole ownership." Ethan glanced over. "You've been awfully quiet," he said, loosening his tie. "Just thinking," I replied, unable to suppress the slight smile tugging at my lips. He reached across the console to take my hand. "I'm sorry about my mom. I'll tell her tomorrow we're both not going." I turned to face him fully. "Actually," I said gently, "I think you should go." His eyebrows shot up. "Without you?" "No way. Trust me," I said, voice low and calm. "It's time your mother learned something she's spent her life avoiding." The next morning, Ethan boarded the Morgan family jet alone. Margot had insisted he sit near the front for optics. She'd said as though seating position would somehow preserve their family reputation. I watched from the window of our modest hillside home, the same one Margot once referred to as charming in a starter sort of way. I sipped my coffee, yes, brewed from the cafe beans I still bought in bulk, and waited. Not for revenge, for the plan. Margot didn't understand people like me. She thought wealth was worn like a costume designer labels, private chefs, dramatic entrances. But wealth is quiet when it's real. It's patient, strategic. She had no idea that the man greeting her at the resort, Marcus Lung, the poised manager with the tablet in hand, wasn't just a hospitality professional. He was my silent partner. The first person who had believed in my crypto strategy when I was just a 23-year-old barista scribbling blockchain patterns on receipt paper. Together we had built a small empire, quietly, efficiently, and now it was time for that empire to say hello. While the Morgans soared through the clouds sipping vintage rosé and congratulating themselves on exclusive experiences, I set up in my home office. 3 curved monitors flickered to life, streaming live security feeds from the Royal Pearl Island resort. On screen, I watched as Margot stepped onto the island in her flowing white resort wear, flanked by assistants and camera-ready relatives. The ocean breeze teased her silk scarf like it, too, had been choreographed. "We'll need fresh orchids in the villa daily," she told the concierge, "and make sure the chef avoids shellfish. Sloane's sensitive." My phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. "Landing confirmed. All staff briefed. Ready on your signal." I typed one word: initiate. Marcus met them with a warm smile and a polished clipboard. "Mrs. Morgan," he said, "welcome to Royal Pearl Island. We've been expecting you." Margot returned his smile with the kind of performative grace honed over decades of boardrooms and charity galas. "Everything looks exquisite. I assume the presidential villa is ready." Marcus glanced down at his tablet with theatrical concern. "There's been a slight change in arrangements." Margot's face froze. "Excuse me." "The presidential villa is currently occupied," Marcus said, his voice professional but firm, "by the resort owner." Margot blinked. "That's impossible. I booked the entire island. I paid—" "You placed a reservation," Marcus said gently. "But as stated in the contract, the owner has final say over all accommodations." Now the family was gathering. Sloane's heels clicked on the tile as she approached, frowning. Ethan stood at the back, a hand over his mouth, but I saw the glint in his eye. He knew. I'd told him everything just before he boarded the flight. He wanted to stay behind, but I asked him to play along. He agreed. And now, watching it unfold live, I could see the tension in his stance, half worry, half thrill. "Who is this owner?" Margot demanded. "I want to speak to them directly." Marcus smiled. "Of course. If you'll all follow me to the main pavilion, the owner has prepared something personally for your arrival." The Morgans were ushered through the lush resort paths past the coral gardens and shaded canopies until they reached the open-air pavilion overlooking the sea. There, beneath woven palms and surrounded by silent staff, a massive screen flickered to life, and my face appeared. I watched from my office as Margot stumbled back, her expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and then sheer panic. "Hello, Morgan family," I said, smiling from the video. "Welcome to my island." On screen, I paused just long enough to let the silence thicken. Then, "Yes, you heard correctly. I own Royal Pearl Island Resort, along with 6 other luxury properties around the world." Murmurs broke out. Sloane dropped her sunglasses. Someone whispered, "Wait, what?" I continued. "I know this may come as a surprise. After all, when you look at me, you see a barista, a coffee girl, a woman you believed didn't belong. But while you were sipping champagne and mocking my dresses, I was building a business. I was investing, growing." I leaned forward in the video. "You see, Margot, I never needed to belong to your world. I built my own." Margot's jaw had gone slack. Sloane looked like she might faint. Ethan was standing still, arms crossed, silent, proud. Now my video voice said, "About accommodations. Margot, You'll be staying in our economy villa, no staff, no chefs, basic amenities. The rest of the family may choose from our standard rooms." Margot let out a strangled, "This is outrageous." "Oh," I said on screen, "and one more thing. To help you understand the people you look down on, I've arranged a special experience." The screen cut to a photo of Beach Bar with a simple wooden counter and a name tag glinting on a uniform. It read, "Page Trainee Server." I returned to the screen calm. "You'll be working one shift a day at our beach bar. Think of it as immersive education." Margot Morgan's face turned a shade of crimson that no designer blush could cover. "This is insanity." She spat, her voice cracking like thunder across the pavilion. "I am not a she." Struggled to find a word low enough to describe the horror server. Marcus remained composed. "You're welcome to leave, Mrs. Morgan. However, the next flight departs in 3 days. Per resort policy, our airstrip is restricted to scheduled charters." She turned toward Ethan, eyes wild. "You knew about this, didn't you?" Ethan didn't deny it. "I did, and I agreed with it." Gasps broke through the family crowd like popped champagne corks. Margot opened her mouth to retaliate, but for once nothing came out. She stormed off, heels sinking into the sand, her entourage scrambling behind her. Over the next few hours, I watched from my home office in Santa Barbara. The security feeds a mosaic of poetic justice. The Morgan family, accustomed to being worshipped, wandered the island in dazed confusion. Their luggage had been reassigned. The champagne had been downgraded. Their staff silent and polite but firm. And Margot. She was issued a simple beige uniform, no jewelry, no silk. Just a name tag, Margot, bar trainee. She refused at first. Threw a tantrum near the pool. Tried to bribe the head concierge with diamond earrings. Demanded someone call the governor. But the phones curiously weren't connecting. Cellular signal across the island had been temporarily disrupted for resort privacy. Marcus had handled that. That night, Margot stood behind the bar under a thatched roof, wiping down glasses as her own family ordered drinks. "Can I get a mojito?" Margot Sloan asked sweetly, barely containing her smugness, now that the power dynamic had shifted. Margot's hands trembled as she squeezed lime into a shaker. The camera feed caught it all. In her silence, I saw a storm forming, shame, confusion, fury. And something else, uncertainty. I leaned back in my chair, remembering another time she trembled. Flashback 7 years ago. I was behind the counter at a cafe near Stanford. She'd walked in, unannounced, to see what her son had gotten himself into. I offered her a seat. She declined. When I handed her the coffee on the house, she didn't say thank you. She didn't even look at me. She just muttered, "This isn't the life Ethan was raised for," and walked out. That day, I cried, quietly, in the supply room between shifts. But tonight, I smiled. 2 days in, something cracked. Marcus texted, "She's stopped fighting." The cameras showed Margot sitting quietly between shifts, face bare feet, dusty from carrying trays. A child approached her, one of Ethan's young cousins. "Aunt Margot, why are you wearing that shirt?" She didn't answer. Later that afternoon, she delivered drinks to the family. Sloan filmed her discreetly. The video wouldn't go viral thanks to the island's firewall, but the humiliation was real. Still, I didn't enjoy it the way I thought I might, because the pain on her face wasn't just indignation, it was confusion. Margot had always existed in a world where status was earned by exclusion, where wealth was armor and service was invisible. Now that illusion was shattering, and illusions don't go quietly. On the 5th night, I prepared for my arrival. I'd booked my flight under a pseudonym. My jet would land quietly at dawn. Marcus had arranged for a seat at the bar. Let her serve me, I'd thought. Let her face the woman she tried to erase. But now I wasn't so sure. This wasn't just about me anymore. The propellers of the seaplane hissed against the turquoise waters as I stepped out onto the sun-warmed dock of Royal Pearl Island. I wasn't in designer anything. No silk scarf, no glinting watch, just linen pants, leather sandals, and a woven bag slung over my shoulder. The kind of outfit Margot might have once called artisanal code for not expensive enough to matter. But as I walked toward the beach bar where she now worked, I realized something strange. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. She stood behind the bar, sweat beading along her hairline. Her makeup had melted in the heat, revealing the real lines on her face, creases of entitlement, but also something older exhaustion. Her name badge flashed Margot Bar Trainee. For a split second, our eyes met. The silence between us was thicker than the humidity. Then she blinked. "You came." I did. Why, I slid onto the bar stool, because I needed to look you in the eye. One last time. She grabbed a glass, began filling it with ice, then paused. "What are you having?" "Whatever you recommend," I said gently. She swallowed hard. We sat in silence as she muddled mint, her fingers slow, methodical. I watched her glance at the family lounging under umbrellas, the very people who used to orbit her like moons around a sun. She passed me the drink without speaking. Her hands were trembling again. "You want to know why I did this?" I said. She nodded. "Because you needed to learn." I said softly that worth isn't defined by where someone was born or what uniform they wear. Her breath caught. "You taught Ethan that a good wife has a pedigree, that if I didn't come from a family with land or titles, I couldn't possibly deserve him. She started, but the words stuck. "You treated me like I was disposable." I continued. "Not because of anything I did, but because of what I wasn't. And the truth is, that says more about your world than mine." Behind us, the waves lapped quietly. Somewhere a server laughed with a guest. The island was alive with small human sounds, and for the first time, I saw Margot truly hear them. When I was 24, I said a regular at the cafe tipped me $2 on a $4 latte, but he looked me in the eye and said, "This place would fall apart without you." I never forgot that. Not because of the money, because he saw me. Margot blinked back tears. "I spent the next 8 years building something quietly. While you laughed at my dresses and warned Ethan about my lack of sophistication, I was investing. I was building a future." She wiped a finger beneath her eye, then glanced at her chipped manicure. "You were right about one thing," she murmured. "This island is overwhelming." I sipped the drink. "That's what you said to Ethan, that I couldn't handle luxury." She nodded. I didn't know what I didn't know. I looked at her, really looked. Not as the woman who'd tried to humiliate me, not as my husband's mother, but as a person, a lost one. And in that moment, something inside me softened, not in forgiveness, but in truth. "I didn't do this to humiliate you," I said. "I did it to wake you." "Did I?" she asked. "Did I wake up?" I stared out at the ocean. "That's up to you." 3 days passed. Margot Morgan, once the orchestrator of glittering galas and exclusive guest lists, was now handing out towels with sunburnt shoulders and a hoarse voice from calling out cocktail orders. And something unexpected began to happen. The staff, initially wary, started softening. They showed her how to properly carry trays, how to mix drinks efficiently, how to navigate the rhythm of heat, sand, and service with grace. And Margot listened, not performatively, not to score points, but really listened. One afternoon, Marcus pulled me aside near the service deck, the jungle canopy overhead filtering sunlight into speckled shadows. "She asks questions now," he said. "Real ones, about their lives, about your life." I nodded. "She needs to understand the cost of invisibility." Marcus hesitated. "Do you think she'll stay changed?" I paused. "Some people change when they lose everything. Others change when they see everything they never noticed before." He smiled. "She's been asking for double shifts." I raised an eyebrow. "Seriously, yesterday she offered to sweep the kitchen floor." We both laughed, the sound more disbelief than humor. On the final day of the trip, I joined the Morgans for one last dinner on the terrace. The golden hour light painted everything honey soft, the sea, the lanterns, even Margot's face as she refilled everyone's water. She wore the same uniform, same name tag, but her shoulders had shifted. No longer squared in defiance, now settled in awareness. She served Ethan his drink, her voice quiet. I owe you an apology." "You owe Rachel one," he said gently. Margot turned to me, and for the first time there was no performance. Just raw, unguarded honesty. "I didn't know how small I'd become," she said, "until I had to carry trays and realize no one was looking at me the way I used to look at them." That night, as the family packed, Margot found me on the beach. She handed me a leather-bound photo album. "What's this? I started making it while I was here," she said. The staff helped me print the pictures. Inside were images I hadn't seen: Margot picking up coconuts for the chef, cleaning pool chairs, helping a young server tie her apron. On the final page, written in looping cursive, "Thank you for teaching me that the best view of life comes from getting off your high horse." I closed the album slowly. The breeze lifted the edge of the page. "I still don't like how you treated me," I said. "I don't either," she replied. The next morning, as the Morgans boarded their plane, Margot stayed behind. "I've arranged to remain on the island for 2 more weeks," she said. "Marcus said I can help with the next volunteer cohort." She looked down, almost sheepish. "Turns out, I still have a lot to learn." "You always did," I said, then added, "but now, at least you want to." 6 weeks later, a new brochure for Royal Pearl Island quietly circulated through elite circles. It didn't advertise butlers or infinity pools. Instead, the headline read, "Walk in Their Shoes, the Service Immersion Experience for the Ultra-Privileged." At the bottom, co-directed by Marcus Lung and Margot Morgan. Margot had stayed, not for show, not for guilt, but because something inside her had fractured, and in that broken space something new had started growing. She and Marcus revamped the resort's mission. Now every luxury guest spent at least 1 day shadowing a service worker, washing dishes, making beds, taking orders. They called it Perspective Day, and Margot, she led the first session every month, not as a sponsor, as a trainee. Back in Santa Barbara, Ethan and I returned to our routines. Our mornings were filled with quiet laughter, soft jazz and espresso brewed from the same beans I once served strangers in paper cups. The coffee shop where we met still stood on the corner of Marlowe and 5th. We went there every Saturday. The baristas knew our names, and now Margot's too. She came with us once a month, no glam squad, no performance. Just a woman sipping black coffee and asking the server how school was going. Last week, she left a $500 tip in an envelope with a handwritten note, "You matter," even when the world pretends not to notice. In our living room, the photo album Margot gave me sits on the bookshelf next to my degrees and the framed contract from the Royal Pearl acquisition. People sometimes ask me, was it worth it making her work that bar? And I always say the same thing. It wasn't about punishment. It was about possibility. Because if someone like Margot Morgan can unlearn generations of snobbery, then maybe there's hope for everyone else, too. Not long ago, I caught her standing in our backyard staring at the sky. She turned to me and said, "You know, wealth makes you think you're standing on a mountain, but sometimes you're just on stilts, and one strong gust and it all topples." I finished. She smiled. "Thanks for bringing the wind." These days, our family dinners are filled with laughter, not tension, and Margot. She insists on helping cook, says the heat keeps her grounded. Sometimes she still slips, sometimes she still forgets, but she tries. And that I've learned is its own kind of grace. Have you ever been underestimated, excluded by people who thought they were better? Share your story below and don't forget to like and subscribe for more powerful true stories of transformation, betrayal, and redemption. Because sometimes the most expensive lesson is the one that humbles you. And sometimes that's the only one that sticks.